Welcome back to Seattle Sucks, a podcast about hating the city we love. It's me, Colin. Greg is here. Brian is here. And the Paella master, friend of the show, Chris Peguero. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Paella King on the boat.
King.
Yeah.
Hey.
After Megas Paella, I think best friend of the show.
That's probably fair.
I'll keep us all well fed.
Yeah, other guests of the show, do better. Step up.
Hint, hint.
Yeah, one-time District 2 council candidate and city employee, Chris Peguero.
Yes. Thank you.
Officially endorsed by Seattle Sucks Podcast. Some are saying that might have been the problem.
I'm
I appreciate it.
really sorry about having you on the show while you were running in a primary election.
Well, we never promised that the Seattle Sucks bump would be positive.
Yeah, There's a bump.
I mean,
There's a bump.
And if it makes you feel better, we didn't get Ari through the primary either. So all our faves got knocked out.
That was the only goal I had, was to get better numbers than him. But you know what? Hate goes a long way.
Yeah, fuck.
Yeah, oh man, that sucks.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Well, I guess I'm torn. Like, do we keep doing
Natalie
this podcast? That's the
Bruglia.
question, right? Is
Yeah.
Seattle good?
I did tell somebody that you had threatened to quit the podcast or disband the podcast, and then Shama was going to pull ahead, so we might actually have to do it.
You guys have plans. You're going to go on vacation. Nope.
No. It was it would have been we'd have to disband if
something
Sean
good-
won.
well,
it was too good. If Seattle was too good.
Yeah.
It still sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still sucks. I mean, much more hopeful than. Oh, I'm much more hopeful than we were the last time we were here.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm choosing to look back on the Sean Scott campaign with nostalgia and romanticism or something. Trying not to be too depressed about it. They did an amazing thing. They went up against an institutional player backed with a ton of money, coming from nowhere with no real name recognition, and did it from the ground up with a really powerful left program that anyone who heard it come out of the mouth of the candidate, Sean Scott, was easily convinced by. And fuck, in the end, this looks like they'll get within 5 points. And you know what? That's okay, I think. An enormous effort was undertaken, but it shows, what the money buys. Because Alex Peterson didn't campaign. He was essentially a no-show candidate. He didn't show up to fucking anything. Sean Scott was there with an empty chair next to him at all those forums.
It was like the Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Only real.
In retrospect, do you think it was a bad move for Sean to talk to the empty chair?
Yeah.
Constantly address it? Or
Alex, I can't do that to myself. But you got to look at that. That's the mountain they scaled, right? To come from essentially nowhere, and even in the primary, an incredible showing in the primary to get into the top two was still only was it 27% to Alex's 45 or something?
Yeah.
That's a huge gap to close, and man, they closed a lot of it. They climbed a mountain of corporate fucking money, and they got that far,
I think the hardest part is as everything unfolded, the narrative kept coming out that Seattle is a microcosm of what the United States is, right? And mediocre white men can do well with a lot of money, right? And win things while, incredibly intelligent, well thought out black candidates don't win, even if they have the right vision. And I think it exposed what we're well aware of a systemic racism within our electoral process. And it's really sad. I learned an incredible amount as a candidate from Sean, and he inspired me so much. And the hardest part was seeing that result, how the fuck did that happen? Because he did everything right. And and then face a candidate that didn't even show up for 12 or 13 more
Just didn't campaign.
Didn't campaign. So, I got to be careful as a person who's employed by the city because I have to work with all these folks. But I think the other candidates that did make it through, and the quote unquote most progressive council in Seattle history. I don't know how do you verify that.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very difficult for that conservative kind of push to come through. Each council member has a vote, so I think we'll see what happens. But I think there's a great future for Sean, and I want to see him continue in politics. At some point, if not helping to establish a more diverse electoral process, whether that's when I decided to join in, the big question to me was like, who are you going to hire as your consultant? I'm like, well, we don't have many consultants of color, so I don't know. You got to know the system. But
Yeah.
now that he's part of that system, I think there's a lot of potential for hope and to change the outcomes. It's been 29 years, 1967, that we haven't had a black council member. So I think that's telling, and we need to do some work. But it's pretty devastating to see Sean. And I just got to show my appreciation and love for Sean and his campaign. He did an amazing job.
Yeah. Well, Sean didn't hire any high-priced consultants either. He had a campaign staff of actually pretty much all young people of color, queer people of color, gender non-conforming people of color, and they were all incredibly impressive and did just an enormous feat to get that far. But I want to go back to if we're picking this all apart, we know the rest of the races really kind of came out okay. Big relief, and it really does. I mean, it really changes. Shama coming through really changes. I mean, that's huge. And Alex Peterson, I fear him as a powerful institutional player, someone who's plugged into City Hall, someone who has the experience and the connections to just throw fucking wrenches around. But yeah, he's been nerfed by he's hopefully in a council with Shama's leadership that isn't going to vote with him. But we'll see. But when I look around at those races and see how everything else came out, I go what's different? I just want to talk about that more. How does racism play into this?
Well, I mean, I think it's worth mentioning that the Strangers top phrenology columnist did express quite a bit of skepticism over the idea that race or racism might have played a factor in at the time when she was gloating over Sawant's defeat. I guess we'll expect some sort of acknowledgement of her
Right. Yeah,
pull some quotes from that.
Yeah, but over Sean as well. And I mean, so I think we should address this issue of what role race you think might have played.
Because I just come down, I see the enormous amount of work they did, the non-campaign that Alex Peterson ran, and I see similar things in other races. I see, but I mean, Egan O'Ryan also had nothing to say like Alex Peterson, but he showed up, and he did worse. Okay, now this was against the very popular two-term incumbent Shama Sawant, but I mean, Andrew Lewis beat former police chief and chamber and Amazon-backed candidate Officer Jim Fistfight, and how does that happen? He also basically is coming out of nowhere, a young guy, about the same age, similar length of resume anyway, but he had a lot less to say, sounded a lot less convincing on a forum stage, but he looks extremely like the parody of a random generic politician in that he looks extremely white and middle class, So I just think what is different? What's different in District 4? And I do come down to that,
I think I don't know the numbers, but I think we I want to know the percentage of students from UW and where they came out. I think did we have a low number of UW students? I don't believe so, but when I came onto the boat today, we talked briefly about the UW Republican, crew that just got denounced from the national level of chapter of college Republicans, and I don't think that their presence made a big dent in that outcome. But a lot of kids, I can say that because I'm an old person. But a lot of kids at UW are from all over the United States. So I think we do have to look at deeply what race, what the conversation of race and having a candidate of color. How much does that play out in regards to the outcome? And I think systemically it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Oh, I like to believe that the UW College Republicans, old nemesis of mine, they used to pull, I swear to God. So, I've confessed to being a UW Young Democrat previously, 10 years ago or whatever. And I swear to God, it's different people, but they pulled they were the same types and they pulled the same shit when I was there. So they just got booted from the national organization because a year ago they did the affirmative action bake sale.
I didn't think you get kicked
fucking
out for that. That used to be like the
that was the
standard
bread and
event
butter.
for like.
Well, there's
Republicans.
they've gotten kicked out of the college Republicans because the college Republican National Organization are never Trumpers. So that's all that's happened here is never Trumpers have kicked out these Stephen Miller types like tie and suit and briefcase arch
people?
white nationalists.
Which really is the base of the Republican Party.
Right, yeah, I mean,
that's more the national ostracizing itself than anything else within its own idiotic party.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but they used to do the same shit. They had when I was there, they had Tag an Immigrant Day or something.
Wait, what is
Tag
this?
an Illegal? It was a game of tag where I don't know, it was on the hub lawn. It was like a thing you did and you tag an illegal immigrant. I don't.
I'll say the college Republicans at UTSA they erected a border fence, and it was just like a little bit of chain link with a hole in the bottom, and they would have students go through the hole, and you get like a little prize at the end of it or whatever. I mean, this is the shit they've been doing forever. I mean, that was in 2000.
Well, you're talking about Texas, but again, one of our themes on here is Seattle isn't as fucking whatever as it thinks it is, and I don't want to. I'm not saying some large portion of the UW student population is as virulently racist as these fucking chuds, but it shows you that that does exist. It is here, and when it comes to voting, when it comes to voting in this kind of election that people basically pay no attention to, no one's listening. No one's us listening to this podcast. There's so few people who actually, are clued in. A campaign for a local city council race in an off year is about just getting in front of people and going, there's a campaign and you should actually vote. It's actually just convincing people to even have an opinion is what campaigning is.
That was my strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And when it's that, I think the level of just inherent racial bias doesn't have to be that high. It doesn't have to be that
well, imagine if
it can be pretty subtle and still cause you to go not take a very black candidate like Sean Scott, whose face is plastered all over his signs, just to write him off, to not take him seriously.
Well, imagine you're the average Laurelhurst homeowner. Your life's going great. You got your multi-million-dollar home. I guess you just sleep on in a bowl of gold coins like Scrooge McDuck or whatever. And of course, you're not paying attention to shit because why? And you're driving around in your car, and you roll up in your Range Rover tank, and you look over, and there's two campaign signs, right? And one is Sean Scott, and one is Alex Pearson. And I think we talked about
Alex Peterson's campaign signs didn't have his picture on it.
Yeah, well, but I think the role of race in the campaign for a lot of it probably was just that, right? Of people who had literally no information other than those two signs, and I'm going to take the other.
Yeah,
one.
well, they see they're comfortable white homeowner sees one clip or a picture with a quote of Malcolm X showing up in their neighborhood talking about Plymouth Rock, and they're like, well, my people came over on the Mayflower.
I mean.
So I think part of it that was good. But if we look at even the progressive establishment as well, I mean, we look at CAPE, and Cape, I appreciate the work that CAPE did to try to really counter what was happening with Case. But without having a diverse group of folks looking at their strategy and how they were going to dole out their funds for independent expenditure for the campaigns, without someone saying race will be a factor across, we need to use a racial lens as we're doing this work to figure out who's going to need more help and which campaigns are not going to be as significant. When we look at Strauss and Willis, I don't know how much they spent, but there's a tremendous amount of money that was spent there, which could have gone to Sean Scott and to Shama Sawant.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems. And without, again, good progressives, they also need to do racial equity work and have a racial equity lens when they're playing the game. Like, they just have to look inward. And are we, the folks at the table, do we have enough of a lens to be able to see our goal through? And I don't think they do. I think it's completely short-sighted on their end, or maybe it was constructed that way. I mean, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I've seen several folks talking after the election results that whether it was short-sighted or it was actually because they were socialist or whatever, that there was an intent behind it. But we have to look at that part too and make sure that it's just not white folks at the table determining how they're going to spend the money.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Seattle progressive is extremely I don't see race, I don't see color shit, right? That's why we need candidates that's why we need people like Sean Scott, because he was first of all a person of color, a black man, and he was also he was willing to talk about all these things and talk about actually having a racial equity, looking at things from that perspective. And that's not that's not how Seattle progressives are doing it. That's not really on the table for a lot of people. Yeah, well, great. Anyway, sincere congratulations to the Sean Scott campaign for the incredible job they did, the people they inspired, to Sean for running that, in this incredible race and coming out. It's amazing, actually, to close from, to squeak into that primary and then close that gap almost get there against all this money. And it's only because they campaigned. They had it's a great candidate with a good fucking program, and they went out and told people.
When I'd said on the boat earlier, off mic or whatever, but being at the Sean Scott party at the Westie or whatever, and all these very earnest people who aren't like me and Greg who were there because we're awful. And we don't expect anything good to ever happen. So when bad things happen, we're just like, yeah, of course. That's 100% what I was expecting. But, to see, some of these people get, a little bit crushed in real time was not the best feeling in the world. But I hope that all those people stay active and go out. I mean, I hope they see what they did as, special, right? And that they go out and they continue the fight.
Continue to organize.
Yeah.
And I am, as cynical as you generally, Brian, but I got emotionally invested in that campaign, and I really wanted it to happen. But on that night, we were also worrying about Shama Sawant. Mm-hmm. The best candidate lost to the worst, but at least the most important candidate beat the fucking joke. It's huge. I mean, it really to have all the other races, the vaguely progressive candidates win, but keep Shama Sawant on the council for a third term.
She's the voice that we need, and really sets the tone. And the whole campaign of Egan was based in xenophobia, misogyny, and racism. And it was a campaign of I'm not Shama. And I had chatted with Egan early on. I said, Egan, what are you for, though? I want to know what you're for versus what you're not. And, the United Voters of Sawant, came through.
Hell yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to sound like I'm gloating, but I'm so incredibly happy for Shama and the hard work that she's done. And I look forward to working with her again in the next 4 years. I'm hoping that again, that now that we have, quote unquote, the most progressive city council in history, I hope that the other council members align more like they did at the last minute when Amazon dropped their money bomb. It's interesting that, of course, they all jumped behind Shama at the last minute because they saw voters that being disenfranchised for their votes. So I hope that's maintained.
Yeah. Well, I even think the jumping behind her at the last minute for a lot of them too, I think was a sign of her power too. I remember the day after when it looked like she wasn't going to pull through, and people were like, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter. Like, we got the $15 an hour minimum wage because we're a progressive city or whatever." And it's like, no. Like, she's important. Like, she drags people. Like, she's like actually like like beating the rest of those idiots and actually doing the right thing. Well, that's required. Like, we can't trust the Seattle City Council cannot be trusted to do the right thing on their own. Like, and I think the SPOG contract and a million other things have proven that. Yeah. Like, but
well, it goes beyond that too in this race specifically. Everybody did kind of sort of line up to one degree or another after that the money dropped, but even before that, all the PAC money was going to basically run against Sawant in every district.
In every district, that's right.
And I said it before. There's a certain legitimate truth to that. Just saying you need to vote for this candidate who's not in Sawant's district to vote against Sawant, and I mean they're not. That's legit. I mean it might have confused like a really dumb voter, but yeah, it is, even if she gets elected to diminish influence, that's a campaign you can run. It was fucking dumb because all these people have been reading the fucking Seattle Times and everybody else who has just been using Shama as this, trying to use her as this wedge issue, as just haplessly claiming that she's so divisive and all this shit. And the truth is, she's fucking popular.
Yeah.
They ran against her in every fucking district, and it helped those candidates.
The most popular reason why is I just don't like her. I just don't like her.
Yeah.
Scary brown woman with an opinion who's really smart. I just don't like her.
Yeah, and there are people. She's not. She has a lot of popularity. The propaganda has worked on a lot of people. They don't know why. Yeah, but a lot of other people know her name. She has national fucking name recognition, and anyone, even people totally tuned out, recognize that name. And at this point, it's been drilled in so many times that people are actually probably able to attach to that name in their head something of her program. Okay, they might actually remember. Wasn't that didn't she raise the minimum wage? Didn't she try to tax Amazon? Yeah. Pretty fucking actually popular. Again, these aren't 80% issues probably, but that you don't need that to win fucking elections and to control government power. They fucked up running against Shama Sawant.
And that was Burgess, right? He was the one responsible for most of those mailers.
Because that goes back early. Because I was rereading some the Seattle Times articles, or business thinks they can flip the council. That was going all the way back to July during the summer, and their whole thing was it was incredibly clear from the beginning. The target was Sawant, right? Any seats they got in other districts, of course, they were going to take, but the target was getting rid of her. And it was so funny reading these old articles. We think what we're going to do is try and push we don't want her to talk about corporate money, so we're just going to push this thing about her being divisive and that she argues too much on the count and she doesn't get along with anybody. And it's so funny because I was like, oh my god, this is literally the talking points that get parroted at me by idiots on Facebook especially, but Twitter and stuff like that. And it's wow, they were able to get that message into some dummies' heads, but she pulled it out. I mean, I think the thing that was interesting was she was, down 8 points on the night with 48% of the votes in, and of course I instantly was like, they finally did it. They're just gonna throw enough money at this until they finally shove some idiot past her, and they finally did it. But I mean, she just absolutely crushed them in the late vote, which says to me that that vote was class divided, right?
Oh yeah, totally.
Completely.
If you see the map, there's a map that I have on Facebook where it shows the breakdown, and it's totally the north end of Capitol Hill and the Gold Coast Lake Washington, those are all Egan voters. I'm like, and then I think it's the 19th that like it splits off
Yeah.
and it goes right over to like Shama Sawant voters. But like since we've had mail-in elections, we've known for a long time that like it's going to swing to renters and service workers, restaurant workers, and it's going to be more liberal as time goes on. So like for the early, and I hate to bring it up, but like the early celebration of Egan's campaign, I'm like, oh shit, that's going to come and bite him in the ass. I can't wait. And I don't get invited to the gay bars anymore. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. One of the first things, even on election night, he was still saying, like, when asked, I was just reading something on KOW, I forget who, but
Shadow of Amazon.
Was his first response to like, well, what went down? How did you campaign here? Or how did you maybe win? Or I don't know what the fuck. He's like, well, first of all, I wasn't Sawant. I was like, I mean, come on, dude.
Great campaign.
Yeah, like 3 days after you lost, and you're still like on this, but
it's. I mean,
What was the day before the election? He was blaming all the Amazon money and Amazon.
Don't worry, he's continued that.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're gonna get into
later.
That shit. No, but like, well, Chris, it'd be interesting to hear like. What's the racial issue? The racial lens in District 3. Like this is a brown woman running against a middle class white man.
So the mob king.
That makes him sound entirely too cool.
The flash
mob king. Thank you. Shit.
It's all right.
It's late. So. Well, first of all, like I said, when your campaign is rooted in xenophobia and racism and misogyny, I think that's the whole narrative of a brown, intelligent woman that has a strong opinion, who's not a capitalist or part of the mainstream way of thinking of capitalism, who's a socialist. Oh my God, like all these. Red baiting, and on top of it, that creates this fear, and that's an opportunity for someone to come in and try to make a campaign on that. I think within the gay community, we, especially in the gay community, want to think that we're super liberal on every issue, but I think what Trump has exposed is that more and more gay men, especially white gay men with money, are actually very conservative, and especially now that they have wealth. And so I think the piece that's missing within the LGBTQ community, especially white men with money who are cisgendered, is recognizing that looking beyond your own experience of oppression, homophobia, and making a connection to collective liberation, and that we have to do work within our community for trans, black, and brown, indigenous folks and people of color within the gay community as well, and beyond the gay community into communities of color. And I think if our community continues to bring up only those who are connected to capitalism into the mainstream democratic system, and not more radical visioning of what we could do for liberation, I think we're going to continue to have this problem of having mediocre candidates that can't see beyond their own oppression, and that only adds to the problems that we see. And Ed Murray's a good example of that. Like I had a horrendous time working with that man, and I would whiteness and wealth are blinders beyond your own oppression. And once you get there and you have wealth and whiteness on top of it, it's hard to see beyond that and see the continued work that has to happen. I had a friend that came in from Montana last year for Pride, working on with the ACLU to continue the fight for trans benefits. And the most resistance that they received were from gay, white, wealthy men. They said, we're married, we got our rights. Good luck with that. No, you're not getting any money from me. I have no interest. So I think it's a big issue.
Well, let's give a PSA. Conservative, gay, white, wealthy men of America, come to Seattle, where you can live and call yourself a liberal progressive.
Did you just invite Mayor Pete?
Yeah, I did. I think I did. Yeah. Mayor Pete, this is the city for you. Mm-hmm. The country isn't buying it, but I fucking swear to God, Seattle liberals.
Assault rifles are for children in other countries.
Yes. Here. Yeah. They will act that. They'll be like, yeah, wait, you're saying You're a gay man? Oh, you are? Yeah, you're a liberal progressive. Boy,
Automatically.
I don't know if your left-wing views are suitable for the whole country, but we'll take you here. So yeah, come one, come all, gay conservative America.
Well, the thing that we forget is that like money and power buys you like a lot of acceptance, right? And it's that same thing of like whenever you'll have a celebrity who's rich, like the Trump thing's been interesting because you have like a rich celebrity who like will be with a MAGA hat or say something nice about Trump or whatever.
Ellen did.
Oh
yeah,
my
or do
God.
something like Ellen does or whatever, right? And all this, and everybody be like shocked by it, and it's like no, like because Ellen above all is rich, like that's her identity, is she's rich, right? And, like,
But she's really happy about
Trump's
it.
a rich
So
guy.
She's
Yeah,
really sweet.
exactly.
and happy.
Yeah, I mean that was the funny thing about like people blowing up with the Kanye thing, where it's like, yeah, Kanye is black, but he's also a very rich man, like, and that I think is probably his primary identity at this point. And like, yeah, he's a rich guy, he likes rich guys. Like, what a fucking shock. But and I think on the Hill, I mean, it gets to that gentrification issue of, if the Hill's going to be a neighborhood only for like business owners, then Egan Orion is its future, right? If it's going to be for everybody, maybe Sawana's.
Well, I've been here for 20 years, and the vast majority of gay white men that I know have been gentrified off Capitol Hill, but they still don't like Shama Sawant. I'm like, dude, like, addressing income inequality is a mainstream LGBTQ issue. Like, we need to figure this out. Like, especially for trans folks and Black and Indigenous folks of color in our community. Like,
well, we talked about this. We had a friend of the show, Kevin the historian, on here.
Dr. Kevin.
Dr. Kevin.
Not the squirrel.
Not the squirrel, very clear.
And Bradley.
And Bradley. And they brought up that point, and, we had sort of joke because, because of course, like, nobody who's gay has ever been paid minimum wage before. So, of course, she doesn't care about gay issues, right? Like,
that's the trick at work here,
crazy.
right? It's
crazy.
When you're Egan Orion, when you're wealthy, you have class consciousness. Mm-hmm. When the wealthy have class consciousness in America, they're the only people who do. They know and understand that their interests are more aligned with each other than with anyone else. But when you're poor, you don't have that in America, so you identify with these other non-economic classes, and so you've got Egan Orion, the gay wealthy man who again sides with the priorities of wealth and thus is not going to stand in the way of gentrification. But then you have gay men who have been pushed off the hill, like you were talking, economically evicted, gentrified out, but they still can look at Egan Orion and identify because of a sexual identity because they're poor, So yeah.
Or even just to the point of like, as you're saying earlier, like I just don't like Shama, right? Without a reason,
There's no reason.
Yeah, which is the mean lady who's always yelling in magazine, like on the newspaper.
The mean
or whatever,
brown lady.
Yeah,
it's racism and misogyny because this is a politician who does what is like the template for what in any like movie, like the good politician does. Someone who just stands up for what they believe in, sticks to it every
Has
time,
principles.
communicates it over and over, even occasionally gets results, makes an issue out of things, doesn't fucking back down. But because she's a woman and because she's not white,
Well, another way is if she were a white man, it would be totally acceptable. We're like, oh, Shama Sawant, he's my guy, but that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
So
it'd certainly be an easier road to hoe for her, right? But, maybe she also wouldn't have any backbone.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, I think the interesting thing about that is the choice of like images for her that our local media always chooses, which is, right out of the civil rights movement where it's like, the police and you get the stock photo of the cop and then like the civil rights, activist or whatever. And it's always some guy screaming or something like that. And it's like, one of those is scary. Like and with Sawant, I mean, all the way down to David Horsey's awful depictions of her. I mean, it's
his very good, cool depiction.
He's so homey though. Like Horsey, he's even got a homey name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like, he did have the one good depiction of her executing people in downtown Seattle. I've seen like Jeff Bezos in downtown Seattle. I was like, hell yeah! If only that were the case.
No, I tweeted him. I suggested after the election that he should do a cartoon of a Godzilla-sized Shama wrecking downtown Seattle and like dropping a huge foot, smashing the balls, and I don't think he took me up on it, but
Horsey's probably like a ball crushing pain pig, though. So he probably just made it and jerked off to it and then left. But
awful.
But yeah. I mean, but I think the one thing that's interesting. I mean, we talk about obviously the late vote tends to like skew left. But I mean, she didn't just win the late vote; she like fucking crushed the late vote, which does say something good to me, which is that I mean, all the people who are maybe turned off by the angry brown woman narrative or whatever. Well, apparently that's all on the rich side of it, and when it comes to service workers and everybody else, apparently they think that shit's cool as hell.
When
That's awesome.
When you own a home, you have a coffee table, and there's nothing else on it but a vase and maybe some coasters. And so when that ballot comes in the mail, you put it there. And you look at it for 3-4 days before you fill it out. When you're poor, you've got other shit to do.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So,
so I like what that vote said, though. I like that split.
Yeah. Good. I mean, it's the after election night. I haven't seen the number, but it's got to be something like 60, around just below 65% of the late vote went to her. I think. Shall we move on to? We got to talk about District 2 because we've got the man himself, Chris Peguero, who lives in District 2, ran in that primary. Mark Solomon, whoever the fuck that was, got his ass fucking beat by Tammy Morales.
I was not worried.
Yeah,
I mean, campaigning alongside Tammy, what was interesting was I really tried desperately hard with our district, especially for the candidates of color, that we weren't going to be divisive among each other because there's so much at stake. And I think we did a pretty good job of maintaining a nice working relationship as we ran the campaign trail. No one was ever divisive among each other. And I got to know Mark Solomon pretty well. He's a nice guy, but it was interesting to see that he did not come out against the money that he was receiving from Amazon. And for me, that was a no-brainer. Like I have to sleep at night. And so if as a candidate running, I ran a very principled campaign that had aligned with my values. And each of those candidates that received those endorsements from Case or from people for Seattle, Moms for Seattle, you had to fill out a questionnaire. And you have to go in for an interview. So
you had to lobby for that endorsement.
You had to lobby for it. So the narrative of I'm just a victim of success. It doesn't.
You had to say these are my priorities.
These are my priorities.
They happen to be yours too.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, Tammy did ask if I would come out and help be on her steering committee, and I gladly accepted that because we align very well with our values. So, all kudos to Tammy Morales. I think she's going to be a great councilwoman, and I look forward to working with her on so many things. I think she's the right candidate for District 2, and really appreciate her strength and ability to run several. And she ran 4 years ago, so she finally won it, and I think she's going to be awesome.
I look forward to seeing. This is another not white woman with a strong voice, and yet who probably has somewhat a different style than Shama. And I look forward to them being on the same page, pushing the same messages, and watching watching the Seattle Times et al. Decide, are we just going to say they're both divisive and what? Are we just going to say everyone? Or are they going to still just single out Shama and then be undercut when Tammy is saying the same things if we get into a fight to tax big business progressively in this town? It's going to be real interesting.
Yeah. I think they're going to keep the same modus operandi. They're going to continue with Shama and focus there. I think the support, it will fall on deaf ears if that's the way they go for Tammy in District 2. There's so much support for her. I don't know the percentage that she won by, but it was a landslide, and it continues to grow as we count the last ballots. But the Times is not going to get a lot of support in that narrative. So I think And this isn't just calling out Tammy, but all candidates that ran in a progressive ticket. The work now is making sure that they maintain their campaign promises, and that we as citizens are actively keeping them accountable. And I don't think that's going to be a problem for Tammy, but we got to make sure that we keep those folks accountable, and we're working with them, that we're reaching out to them when they're falling behind or they're not supporting the progressive legislative agendas that we need to keep in place, and pushing against Amazon and taxing them. So
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's the
head tax times 2.
Well, and the Tammy one was like on the election night again was one of the like really nice bright spots, because District 2 is probably one of the more low income districts right in Seattle. Yeah. And if a cop had a good showing in that, I would have really lost a lot of faith in the city. So the fact that the cop was like getting his ass kicked from the beginning, I was like, good. That made me feel better.
Yeah.
So
no, it did.
It was a nice bright
spot.
Yeah,
it definitely did. Yeah, like we said, hopefully the first thing on the table next year is taxing business, progressive corporate tax, to start taking money that doesn't belong to Amazon away from them. And but that also is why Amazon, decided to throw their weight around in this election in the first place, right? Like, this is the big thing they don't want to see. In sort of unprecedented way, threw their weight around very publicly and sort of ham-fistedly when last year the council tried to push past when they did pass the employee hours tax
unanimously.
Yeah. So this is what this fight was about. It was about taking down Sawant to preclude the possibility of taxing them on a city level.
Well, I think to send a message too about what being a vocal opponent of Amazon will get you, right?
Yeah, well, it's all message, because
Yeah.
even the tax that they did pass unanimously, and whatever we're likely to get here, is from Amazon's perspective more message than it is material, because
Right.
it's going to be such a fucking tiny amount of money. It's going to be a huge amount of money to the city's effort to house people, but we're talking about such wildly different scales of cash here that to them it's a little bit of money off their bottom line, barely. It's still kind of going to be pocket change, but it says something. It's a message that says, "Oh, you can now tax us. You have the power to do this." So this is why they got involved. What's interesting just is, I've been getting in fights on Twitter.
A rare occurrence.
Now that it's shaken out, Amazon was defeated. I mean, the money they put in, it didn't buy them what they wanted, but that's not to say it wasn't effective. They may have lost, of the ones that matter, that they lost, they only got Peterson on in the sort of contested races.
How much did they spend on Peterson? $3 million.
It's I mean,
if you put all the money of all the PAC money, that's the one they got. So
yeah, it's a lot.
Right?
It's a big chunk of change. But the thing that is, getting on, sticking in my craw is people saying, okay, it's one thing to say they lost, they were defeated. I think that's true. But people want to say that, I'm reading, there's a lot of takes that say, well, the Amazon money drop backfired. That says that because they put in this money, it actually turned people against the Amazon candidates, because they heard that Amazon was interfering here, and they said, oh, that's not right. And that's, I think there's an anecdotal truth to that. I'm sure that's true of a few people, but most people aren't paying that attention in that way. And we know that spending all this money actually has an effect. It has for all these people who are barely paying attention, who are deciding if they're even going to vote in this off-year election at all these mailers and signs that are paid for with this money, with money from other corporations, other PACs, but certainly from the $1.5 million that Amazon put in mid-October. That has an effect. It buys. It allows. It's what. How does a candidate like Alex Peterson beat a candidate like Sean Scott without all that money? How does Egan O'Ryan and nothing come even close to the very popular two-term incumbent Shamus Sawant? how are all these other races except District 2 relatively close? And it's because these lame candidates had this corporate backing. So yeah, I guess the point is there'll be because I got tired of fucking arguing with people on Twitter about this in like insane threads where I was like up at 1 a.m. like with my bleary eyes trying to convince somebody somewhere. What I was trying to say, there'll be a new essay on this subject on the on Mechanical Freak. So there'll be a link to that, I guess.
Yeah.
In this,
I think flipping the narrative that that money did help mediocre candidates, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case. That wasn't the reason why those candidates lost. No, they were shitty candidates.
Yeah. But it did. Shitty candidates got real close.
far.
Really close,
Yeah.
really close.
Yeah.
But I will say though, like I was so happy to see Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders come out and say,
Oh, yeah.
hey, this is a big deal. Wake up. You need to, these are the progressive candidates that we need to choose and not let Amazon buy a city council, a freaking city council.
Yeah, it's
huge.
This is it's a big deal. So I think that was helpful.
It was great, and
Right.
it was a
And,
great talking point. The endorsements were great. The
Would have been cool if Washington had a congresswoman that could come out and support him.
yeah, that would have been nice, especially
Impossible.
at that when the national figures are coming out.
But,
Yeah, you know
right.
that.
Yeah, geez.
Yeah, Sean Scott
Bummer.
didn't have some of the sort of institutional support that he should have
Yeah.
from the beginning,
Yeah.
and Pramila Jayapal is one of those.
Sawant didn't either.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And that less bitter about that,
Right. Well,
in the
yes,
end.
I know,
yes,
but I just
absolutely
just
true.
saying that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, like, but I think I think people are getting confused is like, yes, they took this national PR hit that contributes to their image as bullies and whatever, and in the city too. But that is ultimately a pretty esoteric thing that no one is really paying attention to. And we're talking like this is inside baseball shit. This is nerd shit here. Okay, like Amazon spent this money, and yes, you could if you managed to get in front of someone's face, you could use that as a talking point. And that was great.
It's hard. Did you read Glenn Nelson from Trail Posse, his article in Crosscut the day after the
Which one
election?
was
This was a self-described Seattle woke has died.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a great piece. That was probably the most at that moment for me, the one that hit home the most. But like to hear Egan say, decry all this money, and this is Glenn saying, I had a vision of Jeff Bezos shoving dollar bills down his throat. Like it's hard to like have any sympathy for someone who so willingly will sell themselves for any cost as long as they win. For me as a candidate, I think, like I said, I had to be able to sleep at night and see my kids in the morning and tell them that, sometimes or winning at all costs is not winning. Sometimes losing is actually winning. And for a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, like, what do you mean? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
But they eventually did get it. And what's hard is to see candidates grown adults not get that, not understand that this, for me to have a calling into public service is not about me. I mean, a lot of our politicians, I fucking hate politicians. That's why I ran. I hate politicians.
Yeah.
But for most, there's a good number of politicians that it's all about ego and what they get out of the job of being a politician. I don't think you're going to make millions of dollars being a politician. Hopefully not. Some with book deals, whatever. But you should have a sense of civic duty, and those are the candidates that I hopefully, for me, are what I'm looking at to make it through. And it's not an affinity to their queerness or being gay and liking dick or whatever, like I do, like whatever. Like that's not the litmus test. The litmus test is like, what are you going to fucking do to fucking make sure that people can get to work or people can afford their house or live in a fucking city. So anyway,
and that's not what Egan O'Ryan was talking about. He wasn't talking about those things, but he has the gall to come out and whine like, what Amazon, all that money that got spent on my behalf out of my control by the chamber whose endorsement I lobbied for and built my program and my campaign around what would get that endorsement. I was chosen because I have the views that would get that endorsement. But
because I know everybody there.
Woe is me that they spent all that money. Bullshit.
Well,
fuck off.
Yeah.
The funny thing that I believe you were talking to somebody on Twitter, Greg, that he went so far as to say, well, once I'm in city council, I'll just be my own man. Like, I'm not beholden to anyone.
Right.
Which
That's how that works all the time.
Yeah.
So hilarious.
Well, he had this great thing, which was like someone asked him,
Just trust me.
Exactly.
all the spending has, this is going to be the most expensive city council race in history. And after he got done going, well, I mean, that's I hate that they're spending all this money on me. It's a distraction. It's causing me problems. It's why I'm going to lose this race.
I do hate when a sack with a dollar sign full of cash is dropped in my lap.
Yeah, but then the reporter asks him, well, so what do we do in the future to preclude this from happening again, to stop this? And his answer was fucking incredible.
Yeah.
It was, well, I think the best way to keep these elections from being this expensive, from all this corporate cash coming in, is to elect candidates like me who are not so divisive. And
That's a Trumpian. He just did a Trumpian.
Totally. Yeah.
He has a fucking
also,
point.
If
he's already there, if the chamber's candidate is already
they
there,
don't need to spend money.
Yeah. Well,
if you let Amazon just appoint a council to rule the city, then they wouldn't have to spend money on it.
he's not. He really isn't wrong, because what people miss here is why did they spend all this money? They spent it against Sawant.
Yeah.
Someone who stood up over and over and over again and threw shit in their face and tried to fucking tax them and made them pay people $15 an hour. Someone stood up and tried to change things, tried to actually make change. Well, when you do that, that is divisive. It is going to make the fucking business interests spend money against you.
It is until it's successful, and then you have mayors like Mayor Murray that say, "Oh, well, I brought $15 an hour."
Yeah,
it wasn't Sawant. It
well,
was,
all of a sudden
I
it becomes
did that.
our success once it comes through, right?
That's like Democratic Playbook 101.
But I mean, the interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that the one incredible thing is I think a lot of the narrative too post election is, oh well, democracy vouchers aren't working very well. I'm like, I would argue the opposite. Like, these mega corporations put in all this money for local district elections, and democracy vouchers got us through. Like, that was the ultimate way to keep that participation and that vote moving forward, because otherwise the corporation, those corporate dollars, is really a disenfranchised, taking away a vote from disenfranchised folks. So that didn't work at all. So I think that program is fucking successful. I think that we need to again challenge Citizens United and get the fucking independent expenditures out of trying to get the results that Amazon wanted. But that's a fight for the future, and hopefully Mosquito's
absolutely
push to do that will be successful. I think the council that is currently coming on board will be supportive of that move.
Well, I mean, that's interesting to see what what happens with that, because again, Citizens, I feel like that just becomes a federal challenge, right? And goes, and so, I mean, I would love to see that go to a court that overturns Citizens United, but I feel like there's other steps in between here.
I think another one would be ranked voting, as we saw in New York. I think that's what's on the horizon for Washington State. I think legislature needs to look at that at the state level, or that's, I don't know, like, that's where we need to go. Joe Wynn, if you hear me, you need to get that one through. Like, that one needs to be big.
Yeah.
There was one thing I wanted to say that you touched on there, Chris, with the democracy vouchers. Shama Swant took a lot of heat for not accepting them, because they rightly predicted that there was going to be a lot of spending in that race, which is sort of interesting. Because, I mean, we talked about this on the show, and there was a lot of people talking about it at the time, that it was cynical and silly, but look what happened.
It was a good call.
Yeah.
It was good.
It was absolutely the right thing to do.
And I think for her, right, it's her decision to make as an incumbent, right? She has that power. I mean, I think the thing where the democracy vouchers came in handy was allowing somebody like Sean to run. I mean, I got somebody mad at me on Twitter because when it looked really bad on the night of, and that we might have this like Orion Peterson block. Oof. I was like, you're less likely to get like limits on cap spending, or PAC spending, and more likely just to get the democracy vouchers taken away.
Yeah, right.
I was like, those fucks up there, like that's going to be their priority. Because I think they do they presented a challenge, right? And I don't think that like anybody in the chamber thinks it's a good idea. I think if you gave them their slate of candidates, they get rid of it.
Awful.
I think
that's their opinion. I mean, that's been pretty explicitly the chamber opinion nationally.
Well,
so,
the democracy vouchers, I think, had a good showing because, like you said, the system as it exists actually didn't seem to be too terrible because it allowed a candidate like Sean Scott to run at all, because without any institutional support or a broad base to bring donations from. But at the same time, Sean Maswant wasn't limited to that, didn't have to take that road because she didn't need to. She was knew what she was up against, and she has a base to fund from because she's a fucking national figure. Yeah. Despite the fact that, a huge number of her donations came, in the form of small donations from the district, but still, like, she knew she can bring in money. So
well, I mean, that was all a canard from the beginning.
Totally.
The Sawant's getting money from outside her district, and it's like, well, where's all that corporate money coming from?
It's from here. It's from Seattle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, come on, give me a break.
It's just laundered.
But yeah, and I think that the big thing about the actually the Amazon putting money in is that's what cost them the election. Is you have to push back on it because it does attempt to cover for two things. Like, one, when you look at Egan Orion and his dumbass response, we should be a little suspicious when Egan Orion's like the number one person pushing this narrative.
Yeah.
But when you look at him and it's like, this guy was literally handed everything and blew it. And it's like, he had two options, right? He could do some self-reflection of like, wow, I'm a very mediocre, uninspiring individual. Or somebody else fucked up. The real problem with my campaign was that I had everything given to me. What a
fucking ridiculous. People are sort of lazily buying it because it sounds good. It's like
it's a nice story.
Amazon, because you get to what the media gets to do is
you're still a good guy at the end if you say that, right?
Yeah.
So you still win.
Yeah.
You win something. Yeah. And anyways, Egan's and I are on blocked terms on Facebook.
Oh no!
Oh no! Wow.
Yeah.
I asked some questions. So.
What about Grindr?
Scruff still. I don't know. He may have blocked me there too. I don't know.
Well, as our friend Bradley said, just because you find a guy attractive, you can fuck him. You don't just have to vote for him afterwards.
So I have
the secret.
I guess my bar is pretty high with fuckability. Like, you got to be a good person. Like, I fucked like ugly people, but they're good people.
Oh God!
Sorry.
No, we should get out of this happening for a
There's
second.
that beer that just hit me. Sorry.
But I think the other sort of the other thing this narrative covers for, right, is if you look at the way the spending in this election, if you look at the way, like, say, I would look at it as like, okay, Amazon, or corporate money spent this amount. They're able to get a total empty seat elected for District 4. And they, they came close on Sawant. If I were them, I'd be like, oh, well, that just means we need to spend more next time.
Yeah.
Maybe
that's what's going to happen. I mean,
and I think
that's coming. That's coming in.
They'll spend more. They'll spend smarter. They'll spend earlier.
and I think this narrative of like they're spending money actually screwed them. It is a way of hiding from that fact and the real hard work that's going to be like, oh, they're just going to come harder next time, like, because they have the money and the resources and the time, and they'll come harder at like SWAT next time.
And we've got important election coming up, in 2021, right? So beyond the Trump, the next presidential, coup d'etat, but I think we have a mayoral election and then two at-large candidates, Mosqueda and Gonzalez. Thank you.
Yep.
Forgot that one earlier. Sorry.
It's okay.
Anyways, so I think we need to start planning on who should we be as a community really pushing to run for city for the mayor position. So,
and you mean it under the assumption that your boss's 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 boss just doesn't want to run?
I cannot comment. I do work for the city.
Yeah. Well, we'll comment for Crystal, but I can't imagine Jenny's going to run, which means it'd actually be a much crazier mayoral campaign.
Dude,
So it'll be
what do you
it will
want to bet
literally
Ari
be-
Hoffman throws his hat in?
Oh yeah, 'cause one, yeah, it's gonna be all the freaks are gonna come out of the woodwork. So Ari will definitely maybe even Saul. Maybe they'll run a joint campaign.
Yeah.
As a one candidate, two people. They'll be in a trench coat, like kids stacked in a trench coat.
but I don't know. Like it's almost this is a future that is actually
Dicksburger.
unimaginable. It is totally preposterous to make any like to project your vision into the future because this is on the other side of the 2020 election, which is going to completely
Promises.
rend the brain of America
Well, I mean,
asunder. Like it
again.
is
I know this is like
Again.
not Seattle shit, but like, so obviously, that kooky CIA at it again in Latin America.
Motherfuckers.
And, I was
Bolivia.
Yeah.
and I've been sitting there like shit posting on Twitter about this because like every freak who like is, standing for this coup in Bolivia, they all look like these like weird, awful they look like humans that were like born out of a pig farm or something. Like I don't know what the fuck they look awful, but anyways, they're all ugly. They need to fix their faces. But the thing is that somebody had made a point. They were like, if Sanders wins in 2020, Trump's just gonna do the same thing and like launch a coup or whatever. And I just looking at Trump, he's like such a fat sack of shit. Like I almost can't picture it. Like.
Yeah, he
being
wants
Joe.
nothing more to go back to just golfing all day.
Yeah, he's so fucking lazy, but he is
Yeah,
very
he can do-
egotistical. So I'm really split
No,
on
no,
this,
no,
on
no.
this, on this scenario.
no, he wants to win. He wants to win.
You just want to stay out
He
of jail.
can do all the stuff
Yeah.
he wants to do and be president. Okay.
And I honestly don't think that it has crossed Trump's mind at this point. Because, I mean, look, he's had a life
Not a
of
lot
very...
does, Brian.
Well, but he's had a life of very open criminality that nobody's cared about. And I don't think it's even crossed his mind at this point that he could go to jail.
Oh, no, no,
Like,
no.
I think
absolutely
that's
not.
the
No.
furthest thing from his brain.
No, it wouldn't. He would be utterly baffled and
Yeah,
to find
if he wound
himself
up in jail, like he
in a
would be the
courtroom,
most surprised
he
person
would,
in
he
America.
would be like, no,
Who
you
goes to
understand.
jail.
I'm Donald Trump.
Yeah,
You just you keep saying it's like, no, yes, sir, you've been convicted. No. Don't
Yeah.
you know who I am? It's right here on the documents.
Yeah.
No, that's obviously another
What
thing
would
that's
happen
not
to his
going to happen.
hair, like in jail, man?
Oh, I know. I don't know what the wig policy is, but yeah.
I think Melania would have to take care of it, right?
Conjugals.
It would be the problem is that Donald Trump. I don't know if you guys remember that scene from I think it was like the first X-Men film where the guy just like puts his face against the bars and he just completely melts away into like water and fat and gets out of the jail.
Oh, yeah.
And that would be Donald Trump. Like
Yeah.
he just smash his face into the bars. It would just melt in the water and fat and just fucking fall off the side of the castle. But, yeah.
We went from the mayoral election to.
Yeah, this is a real side thing.
This
But
was
I
to
just
spare you
Oh,
and
got
your
it.
career.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah, this is
Just skipped over that one.
Thank you.
yeah.
South Park.
Yeah. Cool. Chris, do you want to sum up in any way about
I'm just glad I
new
didn't win.
council?
I'm just glad I didn't win. I'm glad I got a different job. No, they're just coming in here I'm like, what the hell am I going to talk about? Because I kind of unplugged a little bit because sanity, and it's been awesome being at home.
What are you
with
saying about
kids.
my sanity?
my sanity?
There's an implication
I
there.
got kids.
Chris.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. I have
yeah,
nothing,
So, just going down. Just going down. Shit. I don't know. Yeah.
So life is good. You've unplugged from the race now that it's
Unplugged.
over.
No, I'm looking forward to working with the council. I burned the bridge with Egan early before the election ended, so I was a little nervous about that because I got he might get the energy committee, and I do some work with at City Lights. I'm like, shit, that's going to be really hard. So thank God Sean was there.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a job tomorrow, hopefully. Don't listen. I hope Jenny's not listening to this. She's a fan, I bet.
Oh, she
definitely
one of our
is.
first patrons.
Well, she likes my
Sure.
sports takes, so she tunes in for that.
No, I'm excited. I think the other pieces that what were revealing to me, and I think it was, again, like I mentioned, Glenn Nelson's piece in Crosscut was I-1000, Referendum 88, and the car tabs thing. I think those two pieces are really unfortunate, and we need to look at as we move forward. I think the city and the county pushing back against the car tabs is great. I hope that curing some ballots in King County and the counties that did vote for I-1000. I hope that switches that around. I'm not hopeful. I think it kind of sucks that we had to bring in. I want to address race rather than bringing in more folks to make it more palatable for white voters. So bringing in veterans as part of I-1000, I think, there's a calculation there, and that's fine. I think, veteran protections and work, we need those, absolutely. But we need to be real specific about race and what those outcomes are. So I look forward to seeing that challenge as well. I think it's always unfortunate when we put civil rights and equity, racial equity to a vote. We should never have that as a standard in this country and in Washington State. So that's really unfortunate. And that was the same with Ref 74 when we voted for marriage equality in Washington State. So having Shama win made me fall in love with the city I like to hate. I'm stealing your lines.
Hey, great work.
Hey, I listen to the show. So no, but I was seriously going into the election, I was getting pretty sad about the city and the possibility of Amazon actually winning a council, and that was really depressing. So I'm glad that I can live here and be happy to live here again, and know there's a lot of work to do in the future, and I look forward to working with this council on it.
Hell yeah! Well, we look forward to seeing your work and what you do next, man. So yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing what Sean does next.
Yeah.
True that. I think you're really right, though, to point out the cosmic horror that is local politics, Chris, because I feel like the more you look, the more it just warps your whole soul, but you can't look away.
Yeah, it is. It is insanity inducing.
Yeah.
We are now completely
we're
insane.
we are
being
staring
on the
into
show and having to pay attention has made me a worse person.
It totally.
I'm far and away.
Totally. And talking to anyone gives me a lot of contempt now that I wouldn't have had before.
Yeah. You make this mistake of trying to have. How do you get into political conversations?
I don't. People start them with me because they look at me and they go, "White guy, I can do this combo."
You look PMC as fuck, dude.
Okay, well, all right.
Well, the thing is that Colin, he's still working on his beard.
That's
Hope
true.
his podcast and beard comes in.
I'm trying,
so
man.
he's still safe to approach.
My aesthetic doesn't belie my hobby.
He has that type of facial hair that can only produce a Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
Because you have heavy PMC energy. Because you're a tech bro coder shithead.
Yeah, freak.
Go home, tech bro.
People, you come in with stories all the time of someone in your life who started talking to you like you're a shit lib, and you actually then open your mouth and be like, nah.
Yeah, I'm probably.
What was the one today?
The one today was the Shama Swant is, and this is a quote, a lunatic.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where it started.
That was the beginning.
That was the beginning, and then just the stuff just ripped out of the Seattle Times, just completely credulously digested and then regurgitated back to me at 75% fidelity.
Well, it is kind of
Colin's
funny.
describing the process you should undergo after listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
Well, and I think Chris, you
Right.
posted that horsey cartoon with the X's and everybody's face.
Yeah.
But it is kind of funny that people look at the Seattle Times, who is literally wrong about everything in this election.
Yeah.
And be like, yeah, that's a credible source.
Well,
they've been wrong about everything always.
No, they're not. But their endorsements are not factually right or wrong. They have an agenda, so that's all.
Did you see the
They
spin
should
piece?
show you how out of touch with people they are. But they don't
I
care.
guess that's what I mean. It's
They don't
wrong.
care.
Was that the Ed board?
They did. The Ed board did a spin piece right after the election, and they just got to work together and be less divisive, and this is what we predicted. Kind of what?
Hell yeah!
I was interviewed by you motherfuckers. That's
Yeah.
Well, about a week before the election, Danny Westney, my personal favorite columnist of the Times, had a whole article about how actually now that Bernie has this billionaire, or is talking about this wealth tax, that we actually should feel sorry for Jeff Bezos. So the mood's going to change in the country.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos was a villain, but now he's going to be sympathetic.
Because we're going to tax him too much.
Right.
I did also want to say that I think in retrospect, we should be a little bit kinder to Alex Peterson missing all those events, because when Mulder and Scully are after you, you have to lay low. I mean, I'm sure he was cocooning himself in with his own spit or something somewhere in his lair. It's just not that easy to campaign. So when you're cryptid, I mean, that's just...
This was his hibernation period.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
So,
Okay.
It's difficult doing a public campaign. I think that's what it comes down to.
That's just the way it is.
Well, just remember all the
Alex
criteria of like people saying, "Oh, Shama didn't do anything. All the meetings that she canceled, she didn't produce any legislation." Well, no, she produced 55 pieces of legislation that were pretty significant, and those weren't cancellations; those were rescheduled meetings. Let's hold the same bar for Mr. Peterson when he's in the next year, 2, 3 years. Let's see what his track record is. What did he bring to the table?
I'm just hoping he burns out or like returns back to his birthplace from 500 years ago or whatever.
A guy like that is a robot. He doesn't burn out. He just shows up to work every day, punches a clock, and does the bidding of his vampire overlord.
Right.
Like,
Slumbers
he is
every
a Renfield
7 years.
for the corporate interests in this town. He's just going to show up.
Yeah.
He's going to whatever. If he's just alone, like no vote on something, great. If he can like use his knowledge of procedure to fuck some shit up, if he can use the bureaucracy of the city to cause problems in other ways, then that's what he's going to do.
Cool.
He's not going to think about it too hard. He's not going to get worked up about it. He's just going to come to work every day and just do what he was programmed to do.
He's lunch pail.
Yeah.
Lunch pail wrecker.
Non-skilled position. So anyway, we could.
And best of all the while, he's going to call himself a progressive doing it.
Hell yeah. Mm-hmm. That rocks. Well, no, sorry.
So I think one of the last things I just want to leave is we really the piece that I opened up with earlier, talking about how racism really is part of the structural components of electoral politics in Seattle. Like, we have to address those pieces. I think we need to look for good candidates that are support women of color in their voice and encourage more representation from folks of color to get out there. I think it's a big ask. I think as soon as, my personal experience, as soon as I announced I was going to run, like, I became a number one hit at Save Seattle, and they did lots of write-ups on me. Homophobia and racism and transphobia came flying at me. So it's a big ask whenever you put yourself out there. But I think there's so much, there's so many great people out there that we could really, I think, bring up and support them as they go through that and make sure that they have enough support when that does happen. And Nikita Oliver, for I would hope that she continues to support the work that she's doing in the community. But is there a way to find other folks that have that same perspective, especially women of color?
Yeah,
definitely.
I mean, that's If electoralism is to be a path at all, it's going to involve recruiting a shitload of actually good people to run for all these offices.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you again, Chris, for coming back to the show.
Thank you so much. Love to have you on the boat. Very disappointed you didn't show up with any paella.
Next time, I guess.
I don't know if you'll invite me again. There's going to be something.
You're welcome back.
Anytime.
Back on the official enemies list now. That's in my head.
If I lose my job, maybe I'll get a full-time job.
You already got the slogan down. You can take my job. I'm the Alex Peterson of this podcast.
If you lose your job,
look,
this is maybe a joint venture I'm suggesting. Paella boat.
Ooh.
Think about that.
Paella boat.
Hell yeah.
There's a grill in the back.
Yeah, there's fire involved.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
But we're surrounded by water.
All right. Well, we have some patrons to thank before we close out. Daniel Worthington, thank you. Ryan Paul, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Jeffrey Snyder, thank you.
Whoa, three.
Patrons. Yeah, there were like 2 today, I think.
Wow.
Sweet.
So
Ryan Paul said what's up to Jake.
Yeah, hell yeah. Get out of that suicide forest.
Another thing to call out. Wednesday, December 11th at the Beacon Theater.
On Rainier.
Yeah,
at 7
Rainier.
p.m.
7 p.m. Seattle Sucks presents Class of 1999.
Oh yeah. Malcolm McDowell, Pam Grier.
Hell yeah.
Stacy Keach, bleach blonde hair and albino contacts at his insistence. Nobody asked him to do that.
He's just method, man.
It's the classic Seattle movie you know and love.
Yeah, we all love to cheer when Seattle's on screen, so come on out.
An accurate prediction of the future of 1999,
Yeah.
where the Seattle schools are overrun with gang criminality
Right.
and other hoodlum
Seattle's a
shenanigans.
deindustrialized wasteland.
Yeah, that part's true. Cool, great.
All right. Well, yeah. Thanks for listening, and you'll be hearing more about that event as time progresses. So, thanks again, Chris, and I guess we will.